Let's go, Rider Nation.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Yeah, here we go. It's a feeling now. Hit 'em high, hit 'em low, 'cause we're dealing now. Everybody's giving it all they got, 'cause we're ready.
Welcome to the Piffles podcast, your Saskatchewan Roughriders fan podcast. Thanks for joining us here for our second episode of 2025, episode 301. Thanks for joining us. I'm Alex.
And I'm Steve.
And I got to break some news here. Normally we have Greg with us. Unfortunately, because free agency is coming up, he wants 300 grand like Geno Lewis. And we offered him like 300 pennies. And he balked at that. So,
which was still a raise,
right?
Despite his performance last year, he still was getting a raise,
a substantial raise, might I add? Because I don't even know what the percentage of that raise is. Way more than like 300,000%.
It's a big number.
It's a big number. So Greg balked at that, and we're in contract negotiations. So I think we're going to let him test free agency and see what happens. Maybe he's back next episode. Who knows? Our people will talk to his people. We'll figure it out. Maybe
we have people.
It's you and me, really.
Oh, and his people is him.
Yeah, so we'll talk to Greg and see if we can figure it out. Maybe we'll throw a Churchill his way, see what happens. But thank you for joining us here on the show, listening on your favorite podcast platform, watching on YouTube and SAS Telemax TV on demand. Piffles podcast, of course, is brought to you by our great friends at Dairy Queen on Elphinstone Street and SAS Drive in Regina. You can give us a follow on X at Piffles Pod. You got me. I'm at Real Alex D.
And I will take your pity follows at Safamod.
And I think for now,
every single one of them.
Pity follow Greg as well, too, at Greg on Sports. He would hate that, and that might drive his price down or up. Either way, probably not good for him, but that's what we want. We're on Facebook, of course, Blue Sky if you're on there, of course, and all the other socials. You know where to find us. It's been a good start to this week for the Rough Riders. For once, Jeremy O'Day probably, they listen to the show. They know what's going on. They know our show comes out on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and they usually announce stuff on Wednesday. They got to it right off the bat this week and got to it on Monday. So we're going to talk about a lot of big news here in Riderville with the signings. So we'll get started right off that with the opening kickoff. Okay, so we'll start with the re-signings before we get to the signing. So the re-signings, the biggest one, obviously, linebacker Jameer Thurman signing for 2 years. When that first happened, Steve, give me your initial reaction.
Yes, it was a massive celebration. There's no other word for it. He was the key to our defensive success last year. Between him, Micah Johnson, and Roland Milligan, those three are all on the absolute must-sign lists. And to get Jameer Thurman for another 2 years in Rider green and white to hold down that middle linebacker position is killer. In my opinion, he is the best middle linebacker in the league, not playing in Toronto.
So you put him just behind Wynton McManus then?
Just behind, and there are times I may not even do that. He is a beast, and he improved our defense from game one. And the one thing you read about him everywhere is he is a guy that just goes out there, play after play, and goes balls to the wall 100% to the whistle. You don't hear, he doesn't take care or get involved in any extracurriculars. He just, from whistle to whistle, he is on, and he made a huge difference last year. And I'm excited to see what he can do in the second year of a Corey Mace defense.
Well, and that, to me, it was such great news because it was a 2-year deal. I was expecting a 1-year deal, and you talked about him playing balls to the wall. He played the last part of the year last year with a broken arm. At Grey Cup, he was there signing autographs, but he had his arm in a sling after just having surgery. So get him back to full health. I mean, we saw what happened at the beginning of the year. He was getting pick sixes, forcing fumbles. He was everywhere on this defense. I expect nothing less in 2025. And what Corey Mace was talking about was just his leadership. And when we talked to Corey last week, we asked what the difference is between 2024 and 2025 is going to be. And he said it was going to be more so like the players leading the team. And that's a guy like Jameer Thurman in the locker room. So now that they've established what they want to do, what their culture is, Corey said it here on the Piffles podcast that I'm excited to see the players lead the players, not just have the onus fall on the coaches. So this is something that obviously they're very comfortable with Thurman doing. And he's kind of a quiet guy. Like, we don't hear a lot from him. Does his playing on the field. And that's, I mean, if you're a leader by example and you play like that and you're good in the locker room, what more do you want really out of a middle linebacker?
Well, if you're coming back, I look back to years past where we had leaders like Nick Marshall, who were the vocal, loud, in your face kind of guys. And I almost prefer the way Jameer Thurman does it. He is an on the field leader. He leads by example, like you said. That is, to me, what this team needs more than that guy who's going to rah you on the sidelines. We've got a coach who can do that now. We don't have Craig Dickinson in Ryder Green taking them bowling. We have a guy that they actually want to play for. So now the guy is on the field, can just play football. And it is such a massive difference to me. And like I said, another 2 years of Jameer Thurman is perfect.
And then also with the sticking with the linebackers, because we were talking about linebackers in our deep dive last week, and that was the concern was what are they going to do with their starters? Is it going to be Thurman, who's a pending free agent? Well, yes, we know that. Obviously, CJ Rivas is the cover linebacker. What about the other spot that was Adam Auclair's last year? Well, Auclair's still a pending free agent, likely wants a raise after the season that he had, and deservedly so, because he was very, very good. Probably one of the most under the radar, or like one of the best under the radar, signings that happened in the CFL and free agency last year. Well, the Riders re-signed AJ Oullette, who was his backup, beast on special teams. We got a shot in the NFL, had a workout earlier or later in 2024. Maybe AJ Allen's the answer at the will linebacker position. So if they want to keep that a Canadian spot, AJ Allen can absolutely step in. Or now they have options here. You have CJ Avery, who started the season out there and played excellent, but kind of got caught up in the numbers game with once the Canadians started getting hurt everywhere. So they had to flip the ratio. Adam Auclair got starts and played admirably, played very, very well. So maybe AJ Allen gets a legitimate shot here at starting linebacker.
And honestly, AJ Allen to me is a guy that quietly went about his job. He didn't really stand out the way you expect him, or you expect a guy in the linebacking core to, but in a good way. He was never out of position. He led the team, or was it the league, in special teams tackles?
Yeah.
And just he seemed to be everywhere on the field. And I know you were able to finally read this signing. You had a little trouble with his NFL tryout, but the re-signing was done not in hieroglyphics for you. Yes. I love him calling us out for that. That was deserved and hilarious.
Oh, he missed it.
Yeah. And we all did. Like, nobody else saw his name on that list, but for some reason it just skated on by. And that to me defines the season that he had. Is he just on special teams, he was behind Roland Milligan all season. He was the next guy up, despite performing at such a high level all year. I'm excited to see him get the chance to get a real lengthy chance at starting in that linebacking core.
Well, and every time he was on the field, he made plays. You look at that pick six to start the game against BC, which was for second place late in the year. So this guy can make big time plays, makes an impact, and to get him on the field more in 2025 would be a good thing for this defense. It might have to come at the expense of Adam Auclair, but there's still time to to figure that out. But this is the reality of the salary cap era, right? So wouldn't be surprised if AJ Allen's the maybe not starter, but at least the number one Canadian in that position going forward here into training camp when that starts. And also starting this week, they started out with the Riders signing Malik Carney on the defensive line. Only had 4 sacks last year, but I thought his play was better than that. The league leader in sacks only had 8, and Carney missed a handful of games with injury. So he would have finished with 6 sacks on, if you go by his pace, he would have finished with 6. But he reminded me a lot of times of Willie Jefferson in the sense that he was getting knockdowns. He was kind of dropping back and stopping screen passes. There was a handful of times I can think right off the bat that he was just knocking passes down. So yeah, it wasn't the numbers that we were hoping for at getting to the quarterback, but the guy still had a very solid season. And if he can stay healthy, is our number one pass rusher on defense.
The biggest problem I have when it comes to signing defensive linemen is everybody looks at sacks. And that's the only stat people seem to care about. But if you look at the season that Malik Carney had, he was rated out very highly by Pro Football Focus as a guy that performed well as a defensive end. Yeah, he wasn't getting the sack numbers, but he was getting into the backfield. He was making tackles for losses. And like you said, the knockdowns and plays that don't always get noticed quite to the extent that a sack does. We all want to see a Rider defensive end leading the league in sacks. That's fun. I want to see double-digit sacks from a guy. But if he is doing his job, that's not the only number that's going up. So this is one of those I think is going to be kind of an under-the-radar signing. He was a much bigger free agent signing last year, and I think people expected more. And I think they're going to get more in 2025, just based on the numbers that he had this past season outside of the sacks. I think you're going to see everything go up because he's going to finish those later hits on the quarterback that don't quite lead to sack, pass knockdowns, everything. So I really do believe that we are going to see an improved 2025 from Malik Carney, and I'm pumped for it.
That's a really good point you brought up about the expectations of him last year, because he was replacing Pete Robertson, who had a couple really good years here in Saskatchewan, one excellent year, then a bit of a down year in 2023. But we were looking for that big time pass rush, and with the rotation that Corey Mace has on that defensive line, and we've talked about that a lot in the last 4 or 5 months, is keeping guys fresh. You saw guys like Benoit Marion coming up and making plays, and that's a guy that probably wouldn't get a lot of playing time on other teams, but with the rotation that we have, he's getting out there, got the fresh legs, making plays, tackles for losses, may not get the quarterback sacks, but he's just playing sound football. And I think that's what they want out of this defense is, yeah, we're going to get some turnovers. They led the league in turnovers and margin. Maybe that's the next step is, yeah, they led the league in sacks for the first, half of the season, but maybe that's a focus more in 2025. We know what we're going to do on defense. Just go do it now. So those numbers will come. I'm not too worried about that. By getting a guy back on the D-line when just about every defensive lineman on this team is a free agent. I expect a few more names on that list to be crossed off before the free agent window opens on February 2nd. But Malik Carney was the biggest one on that list. So to knock him off is a great offseason move for Jeremy O'Day. Just got to get Marcus Sayles back under contract for defensive backs.
Could you imagine saying that 9 months ago? Or 8
After
months
his
ago?
first game that he's a must sign. No, everybody wanted him out of town. Everyone wanted him back. But then after that, outside of Roland Milligan, he was our best defensive back.
Yep.
So
you absolutely need him back. No question. But he's going to get paid.
Yeah. And right now he's worth it with what he did for this team in 2024. So right now, when you look at the rest of the Riders pending free agents, Marcus Sayles is now at the top of the list. And I've been pushing.
Are we saving the best for last here, Alex?
best. Is that what we're calling it? I've been pushing this off as long as possible, so I didn't have to talk about it that much. The signing of Jake
Saskatchewan
Mayer.
has a new mayor.
Yep, the new mayor of Mosaic, as Greg has the really awful graphic done up, and we're going to use that.
Yet.
Oh, it's been out there. You posted it in our chat group. Oh, you usually don't read what Greg says.
Yeah.
Nobody does.
I got him on mute. Way easier that way.
But Jake Mayer signing a 1-year contract with the Riders. I was a bit surprised that it was only 1 year, but it does make sense. You want to see what the plan is with the team going forward in 2026 if Trevor Harris retires after this year or whatever. But it was a very team-friendly deal for Jake Mayer. And I don't have the number in front of me, but I think it was somewhere around that 160 range.
165 with another 59,000 in potential incentive.
So
215.
So in a perfect world, he doesn't hit that incentives because that means Trevor Harris is healthy. So in a perfect world, you're only paying Jake Mayer $165K. Now, for a backup quarterback in the CFL who has 3 years of starting experience, was that 45 games he started, 46 games? To me, that's a bargain. And I've said, I've come around on this trade for Mayer, now the signing. I like it for 2025 as the backup for what this team's doing now. Obviously, the familiarity he has with Mark Mueller and Corey Mace, that's important. I'm still not sold going forward. If things go downhill for Trevor Harris this year and he misses playing time for injury or whatever, with what we've seen over the last couple of years, almost seems like a given now. At least we have somebody that we can step in that we know can start in the CFL. And you don't have to adjust the offense for him like we did with Shea Patterson. So I'm fine with this now. I still don't love it, but I'm fine with it. Kind of like Greg hosting the show. So it's fine. It's not Mason fine, but it's better than that.
I'm leaning towards more of the love category, and I don't know that I would have said that a few months back. To me,
when we went to Calgary and watched him play against the Riders in that September game, would you have said that back then?
No, absolutely not. If you would have told me that we were going to make a trade and sign Jake Mayer, I would have been beyond angry, especially with as many drinks as I had at McMahon Stadium. Great place to watch a game.
They were flowing that night.
Terrible stadium, great place to watch a game. But the one thing that I've really sat back and looked at is Jake Mayer performed his best when Mark Mueller was his offensive coordinator. And the Riders are not making this trade or making this signing without talking to Mueller and going, should we? Clearly, your offensive coordinator has faith in the guy. He is a guy that plays a similar game to Trevor Harris. So like you mentioned, you don't have to change anything about the offense. With Shea Patterson, you had to go and kind of get that mobile aspect to his game or get him out of the pocket. Both Trevor Harris and Jake Mayer can stand back and sling it. But to me, having a guy with his experience for just, even if he hits every incentive, just over $200,000, in this league, you need two guys that can do it. You need two quality starting quarterbacks. And now we've got them. And it's a great deal from Jake Mayer's perspective as well, because if he was signing anywhere for 2 years, he was not going to get his money's worth in that second year, because this is going to be a show me year for him. He was not going to get any kind of raise coming off the last season he had in Calgary. So for him, now he gets to take the chance to learn from a true veteran in Trevor Harris without the pressure of being the starting guy, and can learn from that and maybe grow to be our starting quarterback in 2026, which I do believe is the plan going forwards. That is pure speculation, obviously, but
it's likely, yeah.
It's not something that I'm as upset about as I was when they made this trade. I'm really starting to lean towards this was a good move, and a good move for the future of this team, which is really weird to say given how much we made fun of Jake Mayer all of last season.
Well, I still may not be as big a supporter, but of course I am going to cheer him on on the field when he's in green and white. That's what I do. And the good thing is if he does hit those incentives, let's say he hits them all and makes the full, was it 215, 219K? That means that Trevor Harris was hurt, likely. And you would save money on the salary cap for that anyway. So it's not a bad deal at all for what they signed him for. So I consider that a win for Jeremy O'Day.
We're still getting 2 starting quarterbacks for the cost of 1 Nathan Rourke.
Yeah. So now we look at, okay, well, what's going to be the third quarterback? Is it going to be Jack Cohn? Is he also going to be the short yardage guy? They asked Jeremy O'Day that because all the coaches and GMs are in North Carolina for the American Football Coaches Association conference, and CFL winter meetings are down there. They asked Jeremy O'Day about that, and he said, well, that's what we're weighing right now. Are we going to have a third quarterback that's going to be a short yardage specialist? Because obviously that wasn't good enough last year. Shea Patterson had some moments that he did well in short yardage, but then had some where he was just awful and could not get a single yard. And that's been, I've said this many times on the show, it's been a problem with this team for years now that they cannot get that 3rd and 1 when it matters. And they need to get back to that. Maybe not sign Nick Marshall to do it again, who is excellent, but maybe you have a specialist specifically like that. But do you put that on instead of having a third quarterback, a young guy who maybe you want to try and develop into the starter, like a Jack Cohn? So more of a pocket passer type thing. So that remains to be seen what they do with their quarterback situation. But with this Mayer signing, once they traded for him, I knew it, but now that it's signed and he is on for 2025, to me, that just spells the end of Shea Patterson. And with McLeod Bethel-Thompson signing in Montreal as well for this year, I don't see a spot anywhere in this league for Shea Patterson.
Nope. And honestly, any team that looks at what he did in 2023 and 2024, unless he's signing for damn near league minimum, I'm not sure there's anybody that's going to really want to be interested. He was the guy that we signed as a, 6'5" guy to lead that short yardage as well. He was that mobile guy, and there's no other word to describe it. Those damn end around attempts on 3rd and half a yard are still amongst my worst nightmares of this offseason. I will not be sad to see Shea Patterson's departure from Saskatchewan. I think Jack Cohn, we've heard the team speak very highly of him.
Harris.
We've heard Trevor Harris speak very highly of him. I think he's clearly the guy that they're looking at for, the long-term future, perhaps. But yeah, it's time to say goodbye to the Patterson era, and I don't imagine many people are going to be too upset.
No. And to me, it was just the fact that he regressed in his starts last year. He started out doing all right. And I mean, the team was 2-3-1 in his starts. So they stayed afloat with him, but he just progressively got worse in those starts. And even if they're not winning, you'd like to see him get better and trend up. And that just never happened. And then that last game of the season against Calgary, I know it was a mean nothing game. Once that stupid gust of wind gave the Bombers first place, he was awful in that game against Calgary. So that was the end right there. But so those are the signings for the team over the last week. We mentioned last week Trevor Reid going to the NFL. He was released. Sounds like it's going to be the Minnesota Vikings that he's going to. So I know you're not a big fan. You got those Green Bay Packers lids behind you. At least you can take solace in the fact that
pride in yourself, Trevor. The Vikings? Oh,
I mean, did you see their O-line in that playoff game against the Rams? 9 sacks? Are you kidding me? They could use a guy like Trevor Reid on that O-line right now.
They could use a guy like you or me on that O-line right now. What a god-awful, wonderful performance by the Vikings last night. I enjoyed that every
I mean, they
step of the
lasted
way.
one more day than your Packers, so.
Yeah. Yeah, but we had to go on the road in a hostile environment. They had to go to Arizona to play the Los Angeles Rams. They had a neutral site game and still lost by what, 4 scores? Get out of here.
They got pumped. That was
It was
not good.
great.
Sorry
It was fantastic. I will not apologize to a single one of them. If you're a Vikings fan, I hope you were miserable all day yesterday and can look forward to Rider season now.
I just want to bring up one other thing from the AFCA, the Football Coaches Association thing that's going on, and it's AJ Oullette. And it was funny because now this is on social media as of like Tuesday night. Corey Mace said, "Man, it's crazy that I have to tell my starting running back, AJ Oullette, to stop squatting 700 pounds." AJ on Instagram and X, if he posts on there still, but mostly on Instagram, posting some workout stuff. And yeah, he's squatting damn near 700 pounds. So a beast, absolutely strong dude. But with the hips that he has and the injuries that he was fighting through all of last year, yeah, maybe stop squat. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And I know he takes his recovery seriously. He said that's the most important thing he's focusing on this offseason is the recovery process. So that's good. But temper it down a little bit, AJ. We need you for the full year.
What do you even say to that? 700-pound squats is... I'm trying to picture that weight on my shoulders, and I'm fairly certain I'm dead. Like, that is an unhuman amount of weight to be squatting, especially after the injury-plagued season that he had. However, I do trust that AJ Ouellette knows his body and knows he can handle it, but for the love of God, wrap that man in bubble wrap until the season gets here so that we can have a healthy AJ Ouellette and Rock Armstead for 2025. That would be perfect.
Well, last year it was AJ was doing wrestling, indie wrestling. So they put the kibosh on that. And we had one more final match just after he signed with the Riders in free agency. He did one more in Toronto, but after that he was like, "Nah, I'm done doing that." Maybe this is in his contract now. As dude, it reminds me of I think it was Ben Roethlisberger had that motorcycle accident, broke his nose or whatever it was, and the team put in his contract because you don't have to wear a helmet in Pennsylvania. There's no law on wearing a motorcycle helmet while you ride. But they put that in his contract. You cannot ride your motorcycle in the off season. We have way too much money invested in you to risk that, potential injury. So I don't know. Maybe that's Corey's calling up AJ and being like, "Hey, look, man, we can't risk that. It may not be in your contract.
Please keep your squats to a reasonable level." Just picturing Milton from Office Space.
550 pound minimum or maximum. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned Rock Armstead because Raquel Armstead, I thought he was a pending free agent. I really did. Apparently he's not. He's under contract for 2025. So we have both AJ and Armstead for 2025, the two-headed monster, if they can get that going. Who gets on the 6-game injured list first? Because they're not going to pay them both. They're probably, the way that the ratio is going to shape up, they're probably not going to be able to get both of them on the roster. They had their challenges last year trying to do that at the end of the year. They did it for the playoffs, but to do it all season long, I don't think they can. So obviously someone's going to get probably a paper cut in training camp. My question is to you, who is it going to be?
Well, if he keeps squatting 700 pounds, my guess is AJ Ouellette, and it'll be legitimate. If AJ Ouellette comes into this team healthy and you have to sit somebody down, it's Armstead, no question. You're not paying. Oh my Lord,
AJ.
you're not paying AJ Ouellette the amount of money that you're paying him to be the backup. But I would not be surprised to see both on the roster game one. I think that's their plan. They've talked about it. Corey Mace mentioned in an article I was reading that he is looking forward to having that two-headed monster of AJ and Armstead That's what he wants. That's how he envisions the roster. Now, it's easy to envision that in the offseason when you don't have to think about the ratio as much. So we'll see come week 1. But my estimation, if both are healthy, both are playing.
That would be a very good problem to have for this Riders offense. How do you get them both involved? But you have them both. So if you can have them both available, it opens up a lot of things for Mark Mueller and the offense. But
that would be the epitome of thunder and lightning that we've talked about for years.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Sprinkle in a little Thomas Bertrand hoot on in there as well too, and that's a good looking running back room right there. Well, there's the opening kickoff presented by Kathy Festian of Royal LePage Regina Realty. Let's jump to our Churchill Brewing Company odds and end zones. And do you want to do our deep dive on, we're going to do receivers this week. Do you want to do that first, or do you want to talk about Luke Wilson from the NFL and his people's commissioner of the CFL wanting to change rules? Which one do you want to go to first?
Let's get Luke Wilson out of the way.
Okay. So Luke Wilson, former Seattle Seahawk, who I have a big beef with to begin with because they kicked the crap out of my Broncos in Super Bowl 48. So I already don't like Luke Wilson just based off that alone. He was on that Seattle Seahawks team. But anyway, he does stuff on TSN with Jay Onrait. He's one of their football analysts for the NFL. A lot of people don't like him. I don't get it. I don't really watch their NFL coverage on TSN or CTV, so I can't really comment either way. But either way, an employee of Bell Media, and that's important in this whole conversation, is talking about the CFL, which is a good thing. Anytime somebody who's like former NFL player for many years is talking about the CFL, it's a good thing. So he's on this little thing on X. He had a thread about how he could make the CFL better. And there was one I actually really agreed with, and I think it was his third thing that he had on there, and that was get people in the building more. Players need to be together in the building more. And now obviously that's a CBA thing where you can only have a 8-hour workday or whatever, but they need to be able to be together 7 days a week, 6 days a week, whatever it's going to be, instead of just your mandated 4 or 5 days, whatever it is for the week. So that I liked because that does build that camaraderie. It does build, obviously, the culture. If you like being around your teammates, you're going to want to play for them a little bit more. And it just brings you to that next level. We've seen that with close teams. They go further. So obviously that's a good thing. So I would like to see that. But we're going to focus on his idea to fix the CFL's offensive struggles, I guess. Had this idea of limiting each team to 5 punts a game. So that the idea was it's a little bit more of a strategy. Okay, maybe it's 3rd and 2. Yeah, maybe I won't punt it this time. I might need that punt later. We'll go for it now. Or late in the game, well, I don't have any punts left. I have to go for it. That'll create more scoring plays. My problem with that is every punt and kickoff in the CFL is a potential scoring play. Not like the NFL where it's a fair catch or it's a touchback on a kickoff. That's basically what it is in the NFL. And I love the NFL. Their punting, their kick game sucks because there is no return game. It's a kick game. I get it. It's more of a chess thing than anything. But the CFL, anytime there's a punt, there could be a big time play. Anytime there's a kickoff, there could be a big time play. Why would you ever want to take that out of the game? This is what the CFL has over the NFL, is an exciting return game. This is how you can get, a guy like Mario Alford, who I know last year, right now we're ready for Mario Alford to just be let go in free agency and try a new returner, but he was electric for 2.5 years here in Riderville. Why would you ever want to return? Why would you ever want to stop that? So what's your thoughts on Luke Wilson? I saw your eyes roll, but what's your thoughts on getting or limiting punts to 5 per team per game?
First of all, a guy that spent his career playing in the NFL should maybe stick to the NFL. He's not a CFL guy. He is
Canadian.
Canadian. That's great. He's Canadian. His career was in the NFL. I also have to hate the guy because he played for the Seahawks, and as a Packers fan, I just have to. My problem with this is you're looking at it from the angle of, teams like the Detroit Lions and a guy like Dan Campbell who loves to go for it from anywhere on the field on 4th and 2. And yes, that is exciting football. So what they need to do is they need to find a way to what's the word? To give benefit to going for it on those 3rd and short situations versus taking away what is one of the most exciting parts of the Canadian game. We all love watching kicks. This isn't the NFL where you can, when it's 4th and 5, you can go grab a beer at the concession because nothing exciting is happening for 10 minutes. This is the CFL where that play is fun to watch. No matter what, there is always going to be a return in this game. And to go from a league where they're trying to actively take away the kicking game to a game like the CFL where we are trying to prioritize it, and to put in a rule that would limit it the way that he wants is just asinine. Doesn't even begin to describe it. I get what he's going for, but this was about the stupidest way to get there. And I don't understand the reasoning behind it. If you're looking at it again from that NFL aspect where kicks mean nothing, sure. But that's not our game. It blows my mind. And his whole thread and the whole People's Commissioner thing, there are hundreds of players in the CFL and NFL that I would put on the People's Commissioner list before Luke Wilson, just because he happens to be Canadian. There are American-born CFL players that I would put on that list well before Luke Wilson. So stop it. Stick to your comment, because he is a great NFL commentator. I think he's fun. And I think he needs to maybe stick to that angle on things and leave the CFL to those who clearly have more love for the game.
I did reach out to his, marketing agency. I don't know how much of a marketing agency Luke Wilson has, but it's in his bio
people
on
talk
Twitter.
to our people, and his people
email,
are him.
yeah. Yeah. So the email has been sent. He has been invited on the Piffles podcast because I would like to hear more about this and get his reasoning why. So the offer is out there. It's up to him whether they want to accept or not.
And as a professional football player, I can see some angles where he might know ways to improve the game that we as fans may not be able to see. So I don't want to take away from the fact that he is still a professional football player and can maybe see those things, but this ain't it. This ain't even close to it.
Now, I don't know if with the whole People's Commish thing, I don't know if I love the idea of a former player getting commissioner again. We saw how that worked with Randy Ambrosi, but ultimately it doesn't really matter who the commissioner of the CFL is going to be. They're just the talking heads for the board of governors, right? So, but they need somebody like a Mark Cohan at least out in public. So if they can have some
the personality
sort of
more than the former athlete.
Yeah,
in that position.
If they could go, if they could do that, then that's what the league needs to do. Could a guy like Luke Wilson be the face of the CFL? I mean, if he's willing to put in the work and be out everywhere and do everything and shaking hands and kissing babies, ideally not kissing hands and shaking babies. Don't want to screw that one up. But I mean, maybe. But I feel there's probably more former CFL players that are looking for a better job than a guy like Luke Wilson. But whatever. Well, like I said, the offer is out there for him to join the show and kind of debate this. And I would love to have that. I want to have a good, I want to find out the reasonings why and see if it does make sense. Because the way that he laid it out on X doesn't make sense to me. So, all right. Well, let's continue our off-season look here at our riders' positional group. This week, we're going to do our little deep dive on receivers, and I've been looking forward to this one for a little while. Because with the Canadians and with the Riders having so many good Canadians in that receiving core, let's start with those Canadians, because I think this is a spot where you're going to have 3 starters. You're going to have 3 offensive linemen, Canadians. Your safety is going to be Canadian. Probably going to have 3 Canadians here receiving as well. So let's go with the 2 starters for sure that we know are going to be there. And that's Samuel Emilus, he was the only receiver that had over 1,000 yards last year, 1,064. Very quiet 1,000-yard season. Just very. I don't know. Just felt like it wasn't happening. And you look at the stats and you're like, oh yeah, he's actually having a really, really solid year. So we have Sam Emilus and of course Kean Schaefer-Baker. KSB was 3rd on the team in receiving, had 735 yards, missed a couple games as well too. Big play guy. So those 2 guys obviously love what they bring to the team. Love having them as starters. So those 2 are locked in. So I'm not going to get into a lot about those guys, but obviously leaned upon on this offense.
Oh, clear starters without hesitation. They are your week 1 guys. They're the 2 you build your offense around, or at least your receiving core around. I would even throw a guy like AJ Ouellette in there as potentially that 3rd Canadian that you start building around, just based on the potential that you saw from him pre-injury. And clearly NFL teams are seeing that potential because he got a good number of workouts. And then you just factor in his personality on top of it. I'm not sure I remember the last time there was a guy that was just as, like, I don't throw the term around, but just that lovable personality that you can't help but root for.
He's a bundle of energy.
So rare, right? Like, it just seems like the kind of guy you want on the field and on the sidelines as much as possible for the good of the team morale, if nothing else.
And this is a 7th round draft pick from last year too. These guys aren't supposed to make the roster, let alone be fan favorites and, put up decent numbers. So AJ in limited playing action, like, did get in, started a couple games when injuries happened, but had 20 catches, 307 yards, and a couple touchdowns, I think.
But to me, the bigger thing to his game that doesn't get talked about near often enough was his ability to block.
Yeah.
And in a offense that we had with a quick hitting style and that need to get that little bit of time, he was the prototypical Mark Mueller tight end slot receiver, that guy that can come in and make that chip block on those runs. And he almost, if you look at him when you watch those plays, he loved to do it too. Like,
he laid a couple guys out.
Yeah. Like, to me, he looked like the average receiver scoring a touchdown was as exciting to him as him laying a block. And I get the feeling he just loves every aspect of the game of football, from practice to the game, to the blocks, to the touchdowns. Every little aspect is his, like, that. This is his dream job.
So yeah, I expect him to really push for that 3rd starting spot for Canadians in this receiver group. At the very least, he's going to rotate with Del Duncan Busby. And that's the other guy that could really push for a full-time starting job. And I think we'll see a little bit more of a rotation with the Canadians there. So I'll probably have 4 on the roster no matter what. And one's going to back up, but it's going to be a rotation. We see these guys come in and out of games all the time. But Del Duncan Busby didn't get much action early in the season, but once he did get in, showed that he had, some potential there. Had 188 yards on just 16 catches. A lot of them were short passes to start, and then he ended up there was that one game he had, did he have over 100? He was very close to it anyway, but he had one hell of a game where he had 7 catches for about 100 yards. So he showed that if he's a focal point, he can be a very good receiver and cause some damage for this team.
He was a guy that got a lot of talk in training camp and then just never cracked the roster until injuries started taking their toll on that receiving core. And between him and Joe, what an absolute monster draft of the receiving core for Jeremy O'Day. We've looked at this at his last few drafts, and we were joking in our ex DMs about the drafts from like 2010 to 20, basically the Tillman and Chris Jones eras and everything in between. And to compare
Awful
those
draft.
now to what we're seeing, where we're seeing constant hits in the draft, day one starters or at least season one starters,
Late in the draft
shows
too.
you, yeah, shows you the quality that we have at general manager right now. Because we loved Eric Tillman as a general manager. We didn't all love Chris Jones, but we saw what he could do as general manager, and yet nobody gets more hate, excuse me, than Jeremy O'Day over the last couple of years. And now we're starting to see how much of that was coaching as opposed to his job as general manager and the players he was putting together, because we're seeing quality across the board. I just, but from a receiving, like the receiving core to me is the big spot where you really see the quality that he brought in. You look at the draft with last year with Ajoa Joe and Del Duncan Busby, but then look at the guys he brought in the offseason as well, in Keyshawn Johnson, Dante Myers, even a guy like Robustelli, who didn't get a lot of time but did look pretty solid in his limited time. I would be comfortable with a combination of any one of those 5 players as our starting week 1 roster. And that tells you the type of team that we've got and the type of work that Jeremy O'Day put in, especially at that position.
Well, I think a lot of the heat on Jo started with was it Matlin Riley on the offensive line, high pick, retired, high pick receiver Terrell Jana, retired. Obviously, we had Braden Linnaeus and Justin McInnis. Kept the wrong one. Linnaeus ended up getting hurt. Now he's in BC as well, with McInnis sounding like he's going to re-sign with the Lions. So obviously there was some hiccups. Every GM has that, but you look at what he's done just this draft alone. You said Del Duncan Busby, Ajoa Joe. They have Deshaun Mims as well, who went back to the U of R. So he'll be coming in. He's signed up for 2025. And he's a guy who could provide depth. I expect him to have at least a practice roster spot and provides depth. So Jo has actually nailed a lot of these drafts in the last few years. Kean Schaefer-Baker was a 4th round pick in 2020. I know 2020 was a little bit messed up because they didn't have the combine and it was just going based off of videos and whatnot. But to get KSB for a 4th was a steal. So yeah, I mean, obviously the Kyle Hergel pick from last year in the 1st round, yikes, because that guy's probably not coming up here for a very long time. But you look at basically the entire draft last year, Malik Straker, Jackson Ford the year before, like we're finding very, very solid players. Nick Weeb was the other one from last year. Guys who can play. Obviously got to stay healthy, but guys that have shown well when they've got in. So his drafting has been very good. Now, there are a couple Canadian free agents here. Colton Hunchak, which we're going to leave it at that, and Mitch Picton as well, which I'm kind of surprised that Mitch Picton hasn't been re-upped yet, just because of the depth that he does provide, being the local guy. I'm not really sure that many other teams would, be lining up to sign him. But maybe that's also why the Riders aren't racing to sign him either.
When you look at the depth we have at the Canadian receiver position, I don't think it's necessary anymore. You've got Ajoa Joe, you've got Del Duncan Busby, Samuel Emilus, Schaefer-Baker, Deshaun Mims coming in. Mitch Picton was a reliable that next guy up who could play every position and played them admirably. But he's not a guy that you blow your free agency money on. He's a guy that if he's willing to come in at a huge discount at this point, you bring him in. But there are priorities elsewhere on this roster that you can use that money if he's wanting more than league minimum. He's just not, outside of his name and his hometown, he doesn't really provide that value to me that he did in years past.
Well, there's the Canadians. Let's look at the Americans in this receiving group. And you mentioned Keyshawn Johnson and Dante Myers. Keyshawn Johnson, we went into last year not really having a true number one receiver. Once Trevor Harris came back from injury, Keyshawn Johnson was that number one receiver. 746 yards last year. You prorate that because he only played 12 games. That's 1,100 and something yards over an 18-game season. So he would have led the team in receiving if he started from day one. He's a big play guy. He was also just that second down chain mover as well, too. So this guy has it all. Reminds me a lot of Keyshawn Johnson from the NFL, right? So obviously they found a stud there. So that's the number one. Dante Myers as well, too. Prorated, Dante Myers would have had 1,200 plus yards. Only played 5 games, 349 yards, including a couple 100-yard games. Those couple games where Myers and Keyshawn Johnson were together, they were unstoppable. Both of them putting up 100-yard games in those couple games where they started. Just unbelievable productivity from these guys. And looking into 2025, when we didn't have that true number one, we have the potential here for 3 number ones when you look at Sam Emilus, Keyshawn Johnson, and now Dante Myers.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned Keyshawn Johnson kind of brought out that, or came out as that clear number one guy. And to me, I would have put Dante Myers at that spot. Again, in limited time, but he was just that guy that seemed to be everywhere when he was on the field and making those tough catches and being that big-bodied guy that we were missing.
And over the middle, he was making those catches too.
Oh. He reminded me a lot of what we saw at a Jareth Stearns in his first season, but better, more reliable, and overall just a bigger target. To get both of those guys back healthy for 2025 and signed for 2025 at what I assume is probably league minimum is an absolute steal, because those are both guys that are making 180 plus in my mind with the talent that they have at the end of next year. So you gotta make bread while the oven is hot with this season, because I have a feeling there's going to be some big raises coming to that receiving core at the end of the year.
Well, you look at Edmonton and paying Eugene Lewis $300K, which they're not going to do again this year. Same with you, Greg. But you can balance that out by having good scouting and having young guys step up and have a Keyshawn Johnson, Dante Myers for a couple of years, and they're putting up 1,500 yards between the two of them. So that's smart management by Jeremy O'Day and like cap management. You mentioned Jareth Stearns. He's the other pending free agent. So there's Hunchak, Picton, and Stearns. When I look at it, it comes down to, for Jareth Stearns, do they want him or do they want Sean Bain? Because to me, there's no other spot for Stearns on this team unless he takes Bain's spot. And Stearns showed out very well to start the year. He was Trevor Harris's second down guy. He was Mr. Second Down, as Rod Black would have called him. And then once Harris got hurt, his productivity just dropped, hit the ground with Shea Patterson, and he never really got it back. Played a little bit better at the end of the year, but it just wasn't there. So I find it funny that the CFL writers, they put it as CFL.ca staff. No one put their name on it, about 5 breakout stars for 2025. And 2 of them were riders. One was Jareth Stearns and one was Shea Patterson. And both of them might not be anywhere in the CFL. I think Jareth Stearns will kick around somewhere, but I don't see a spot for him on this team as long as Sean Bain's here.
No, and Sean Bain, you're going to have to see a whole lot more out of in 2025, because I would assume he would admit he had kind of an off year before he got hurt. He just wasn't the same guy. He was dropping passes that he wasn't dropping the year before. And as the guy who kind of came into training camp as the obvious number one receiver, he was anything but in 2024. He just didn't seem like the guy. So if you have to choose between the two, I'm thinking, Jarrett Stearns is probably going to come in a heck of a lot cheaper than Sean Bain Jr. But the potential of Sean Bain is so much higher than what we can see out of Jarrett Stearns. To me, it's no question. And you factor it, or you put the two of them, or sorry, Keyshawn Johnson and Dante Myers alongside Sean Bain Jr. as your three American guys. That to me is a killer receiving core, and that's the one you go with if the money is there.
And if you're going to start 3 Canadian receivers, you're only starting 2 Americans. Are you going to have a third one even on the roster? So is there a spot for Jarrett Stearns right off the bat? Sean Bain Jr., obviously that injury, is he going to be ready for training camp? We don't really know. But even if he is, would he make the active roster over Keyshawn Johnson, Dante Myers to start? So, I mean, it's good to have guys like that around, obviously, but when you're paying Sean Bain Jr., whatever they're paying him from, coming over here in free agency a couple years ago, he's making more than Johnson and Myers. Maybe to me, that's an interesting one in training camp is Sean Bain Jr. And I'm a big Sean Bain Jr. fan. You guys know this. I was excited about his signing, and I was the only one that was right about that because everybody wanted him cut after training camp. His first year.
I'm genuinely surprised you didn't throw at your shoulder, patting yourself on the back after everything you said about him. And you were dead on. You called him as the guy in his first year, and you were right.
I'm gonna clip that part out. Just the you were right.
I don't have as much problem admitting you're right as I do when Greg does it. I also don't. You don't need the ding that he needs.
Yeah, it's all the way down. I'm not scrolling down to find that. That's way too much work. That's Greg can do that. So yeah, I'm really curious about where Sean Bain fits in, at least to start the season. Obviously, if he's healthy, ready to go, he probably makes the roster, but who knows right now. You mentioned Joe Robustelli a little while ago. I have to scroll down a little bit. Where was he on here? He's not even on here. The CFL doesn't even have him on the with any stats or anything. So good for you guys. Anyway, he was a guy who was a big training camp was he? No, he came in after training camp, I think. Or he might have been at training camp.
He was a training camp guy.
But a lot of fans were big on him. Guys that go to training camp and practices love what they see out of him. And a guy who I expect to at least start the year on the PR. And who knows from there.
He definitely showed the potential of being that 4th, 5th receiver in the CFL. He's a guy that you hold on to if you have the chance. And I think PR is the clear spot for him. Especially if you have to choose between him and a guy like Jarrett Stearns. I don't think there's much of a choice there.
And the last name on the roster here for receivers is one new one is Jamarcus Bradley. I think he did some kick returning in college. So with Mario Alford probably on the outs here in Riderville, maybe that's Jamarcus Bradley's foot in the door, but a guy that we can look and see what happens in training camp with him. And I mean, there was nothing made about Keyshawn Johnson or Dante Myers when they signed, other than Keyshawn Johnson's namesake, right? Other than having the same name as an NFL legend. There's no fanfare, right? So with Jamarcus Bradley, it's the same kind of thing. Weston Dressler, it was the same thing. Nobody said anything about the signing when it first happened, but we'll see what happens with him as well.
My only concern with him is he's spent 3 years in Cleveland. I'm hoping that the 2 to 3 years since he left has been long enough to wash the stink of that organization off of his future. Because yikes,
what is it? 40 starting quarterbacks since 1999 since they came back. Just
That's
ridiculous.
kind of impressive if you really think about it. To be that bad for that long.
It's almost like they've done 300 episodes of a podcast or something.
We haven't had nearly as many starting hosts.
I think, yeah, we could probably cut down, honestly, down to 2. I don't know. The budget's not really there for 300K host.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
again,
Greg's wanting that raise. Yeah.
we got some bad news for you, Greg. we're pretty hard in our negotiations here. But that receiving group obviously is going to be a strong point for the Riders this season. Trevor Harris is second year with them, right? With all these guys together, going to be even more comfortable with them. And I'm looking forward to seeing guys like Keyshawn Johnson, Dante Myers just take that next step and become well known across the league. We know them well here in Riderville, obviously, with how they played last year, but to become league-wide stars, I'm looking forward to them taking that step to get there. So it should be a really good offensive receiving group and good offense again in 2025. So looking forward to seeing that. And then what do we have left for position groups to look at? We have the defensive backs. We'll do that next episode. And then the offensive line. That should be a good one with many question marks there as well, too. So we'll do those in future episodes, but for now, we'll leave it there with the receivers this week. But that'll do it for us here on the Piffles podcast this week. Thanks so much for joining us, watching on YouTube or SaskTel Max TV on demand, listening wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Of course, Piffles podcast is brought to you by our friends at Dairy Queen on Elphinstone Street and Sass Drive in Regina. Special thanks, of course, go to Kathy Festian of Royal LePage Regina Realty and Churchill Brewing Company for their support making this show possible. We'll leave you the same way we always do with Tyler Gilbert and Ghost Behind Your Mind.